Hey, welcome everybody again. Today we'll speak to another of our authors from Deconstructing Whiteness, Empire and Mission. And today we're speaking to James Butler, who co-wrote a chapter with Cathy Ross. And we've already heard from Cathy in an earlier video. So welcome, James.
Thank you.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm James Butler. I have two jobs. One is working at the Church Mission Society, teaching on the MA program in Pioneer Ministry there. And the other is working at the University of Roehampton as a postdoctoral researcher, working in practical theology.
Okay, thanks. So could you briefly describe what your chapter's about?
The chapter that I wrote with colleague Cathy Ross looks at the missionary Octavius Hadfield, who was in New Zealand in the 19th century, working with the Maori, and focuses on a particular incident where the British government were trying to take land off the Maori people, and how Octavius Hadfield acted within that. And in the chapter, the title that we gave the chapter was about whether Octavius Hadfield was a 19th century goodie or baddie. But really the move is to go beyond this question of kind of goodies and baddies, and to explore the complexities of being a missionary in the British Empire, and to allow the way in which we explore both kind of perhaps his strengths, Octavius Hadfield's strengths as a missionary, in the way that he acted with and for the Maori, seeking to justice for them, and the ways that he approached his missionary work, and yet also noticing some of the blind spots that he had in his work, the ways in which he assumed perhaps the good of the British Empire, the way he took on some of the assumptions about kind of British exceptionalism, and I guess some kind of racist assumptions around different races, and the ways in which they might need to become more like the British in the way that they were. And so the challenge in highlighting some of the kind of injustices, some of the colonial assumptions that he had, is not necessarily to do this work of deciding whether he was a goodie or baddie, but to understand our own complicity within empire in our society, and the ways in which we might seek to act for good, but actually the ways in which we might be blind to the injustices and some of the structural challenges, particularly as two white people writing, working in an affluent country. How might the ways that we seek to work for good, how might we actually be complicit within some of the injustices in our own times?
Thank you. So what made you take this particular approach to writing your chapter?
Cathy is from New Zealand, and so she was more aware of the story of Octavius Hadfield than I was, but she felt that it was an interesting way into exploring some of the complexities of empire. And so, Cathy handed me a whole load of documents written by Hadfield to read, and we had a conversation. We had a number of conversations about them and explored them together. And so I don't think initially we perhaps did have a more of a sense of Octavius Hadfield the goodie, and writing about how Octavius Hadfield perhaps had acted in good ways in the face of empire. And I guess as we had these conversations about that, we realized, that it was far more complex than that, and that you couldn't make a kind of simple story. And I guess engaging in that complexity also encouraged us to engage within the complexities that we experienced. And I think kind of going deep into one person's story or a particular time within their life, this particular moment of challenging the British Empire over their taking of land from the Maori. In focusing on that, I think we began to realize the ways in which it was, just as it wasn't easy to either label Hadfield as a goodie or baddie, that those complexities were ones that we lived in here. And so we do reflect on capitalism in particular within the text, within the chapter, but other ways in which the kind of challenges around race, inclusion, and diversity, this might speak into some of those things and help us to see them in the more complex light that they are.
Thank you. So what would you say has shaped your social conscience?
Yeah, it was really interesting to reflect on this and to see those different strands, trying to kind of remember different things that had an impact on me. I became aware that films had quite an important part to play in this, and particularly films around issues of race and empire. I mean, particularly I remember watching Gandhi, the Gandhi film in my late teens, and being impacted by that and justice there. The 24/7 prayer movement had a tagline, prayer, mission, justice, and I was involved with that. And I think mission was something that I was passionate about. My uncle and auntie were missionaries in Nepal. It had always been something that I had been aware of. And towards the end of my teens, I went on a mission trip to Argentina in a summer holiday before university. And so mission was something that was of interest to me. I felt kind of drawn towards. And so with the 24/7 prayer movement, making this connection between prayer, mission, and justice, that seemed very natural to me. And so these issues of justice and passion for justice connected very naturally to my own sense of kind of perhaps calling towards mission. After university, I went to Uruguay for 2 years, and before doing that, I spent 7 weeks at Redcliffe Mission College in Gloucester. And there was one lecturer there, Jonathan Ingleby, who had written and taught on kind of empire and post-colonialism. And I think he had a very gentle way of teaching these things, but the way that he raised some of these questions and issues really stirred me. And I think, as I was thinking about this, realizing that had an important part in kind of drawing my awareness to deeper issues of race and colonialism. I think living in Uruguay and spending some time in Argentina, I was asked these questions about being British, about the British Empire, and quickly realized that the kind of history that I'd been taught at school did not stand up to scrutiny around the empire, that I had a very one-sided view of these things, and encouraged me to look further. And I think particularly in Argentina, with the Falkland Islands, Las Malvinas, and having to kind of have those conversations with people made me aware of these issues really around colonialism, and made me realize I needed to educate myself. I think more recently, reading theology books around empire and race has been significant. Colleagues, Cathy Ross and her has opened my eyes, who I wrote the chapter with has opened my eyes further to issues around feminism and theology, getting to know Anthony, Reddie, and others, working with Harvey Quiani. This has been important to kind of be alongside people, to hear these things and to have those conversations with them. And yeah, I feel like I'm learning a lot, and that these, increasingly the importance of these things and needing these things needing to shape the way we do theology. I'm increasingly convinced that questions of race, colonialism, inclusion, need to be present as we do our theology. Otherwise, we're just kind of denying the complexities of the times in which we live.
Thank you. So, what do you think are the biggest challenges to the church and the wider society in terms of creating frameworks for social justice?
I mean, yeah, I find an overwhelming question. I mean, there are all sorts of challenges, clearly. I think for me, the status, people just assume that the status quo is on the whole good, and are unwilling to perhaps go deeper. It's easy to kind of write things off as bad apples, or particular, there's particular ways in which individuals have acted that have caused these things, and perhaps unwilling to go a bit deeper and to pick apart the structures. I think there's also an awareness that if you start to kind of pull at too many bricks, you might end up having to rebuild the whole thing, and people are scared of that. So I think in many ways that's perhaps the biggest challenge here is really whether that's a conscious thing, that people consciously don't want to unpick these things, or whether it's a subconscious thing of actually it's too complicated, and I'm happy to kind of stick with the simple answers that I've had before rather than deal with the realities there. But I think that's what I've realized in going on this journey, is that it's a complex journey, where you're going to have to unpick a lot of threads, and perhaps a lot of structures are going to have to come down and be built in new ways. It's hard, but it's a lot. I realize in even saying that I'm saying that from a privilege of from a privileged position, and actually if those of us who have not experienced these injustices firsthand aren't willing to take a bit of the pain in going on these journeys, then I think it's always going to be a challenge. But I think if we can help people to listen, to hear some of these challenges, perhaps we can begin to go on that journey to find those, to challenge injustice and to find new, as you said, new platforms and frameworks for social justice.
Thank you. Just to finish, what do you hope people will take away from reading your chapter?
I mean, I really hope that people will engage with the complexities of their own context and situation, to realize that perhaps the answers that we've always had may not be the whole of the reality. And just as Octavius Hadfield, I mean, I totally believe that Octavius Hadfield was always seeking to act for good, to act in godly ways, and yet some of his underlying assumptions were assumptions formed in colonialism, in the logic of colonialism, and within kind of the empire and the perspective of the empire. And so to realize that in our desires to act for good, that we may still be holding assumptions around what that good looks like, which is actually shaped by structures which aren't fully committed to that good. And so I hope that in reading this, that people might reflect. I think in revisiting this ahead of talking to you, I think the thing that stood out to me was the place of prayer, and how particularly in the accounts of the Maori and in reflecting on accounts from the Book of Acts, that the place that the early Christians turned, the place where the Maoris turned, were to prayer and to trusting God. And so I hope also that from this chapter there's a sense of turning to God in this, and not just taking on thinking that somehow we can solve injustice in our own strength, but to see that as part of joining in with God's mission in the world and acting with God for justice.
Thank you, James. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us today. And now that the book's out, I'm sure people will be interested to read your chapter more fully. But thank you for taking the time out to share with us today.
Thank you so much.